Hello, we're going to talk a little bit about a title for your undergraduate dissertation. So this video is about title and aims and objectives for undergraduate, mainly in the context of tourism, events, hospitality and retail. Now I know you've done your research methods and you've had quite a lot of input from a number of colleagues. I'm going to give you my thoughts on those two: title, aims and objectives, and basically you take the best parts and use what you feel is appropriate. So let's start with the title. Now, in my view, titles need to be simple in one way, and in the other way they need to suggest what the research is all about. I always suggest to keep the titles short. Anything from 7 to 10 words would be an appropriate title. Otherwise, if you keep it too long, what you end up having is a title that looks like a name of the research. So I'll give you an example of a title. And a great idea is to look at academic journal articles and the titles they use. A title from one of my papers: Electronic Meal Experience, a content analysis of online restaurant comments. Now, what was that about? Basically, the topic I had in mind was I was going to analyze the perceptions of consumers visiting restaurants, and I was using content analysis for that paper, but I was thinking about word of mouth and how word of mouth translates into an electronic word of mouth, and as I was writing that, the title was getting too long: electronic word of mouth and comments on social media. It was getting far too long and it was resembling the aims. So revisiting the title, an idea sort of hit me. Well, we've got a meal experience that is happening in physical, and then people discuss that meal experience. So what if I call it an electronic meal experience? And then column, also let me say what I'm doing. If I was doing a case study, it would be a case study approach. But in this case, it was a content analysis of online restaurant comments. In hindsight, it could even be shorter. It could be 7 words: electronic meal experience, a content analysis approach. Bam, done. I've kind of given a hint of what it is about, and I've definitely said what my method was about, and that's the title. Okay, so we've got our title and we need to write our aims and objectives, and you'll use that for your proposal, but what happens quite often is people do their proposal and then they just attach their proposal as an appendix. I've seen this quite a few times, and they haven't put their aims and objectives that were in the proposal anywhere in the dissertation, or in some cases they just bury them on page 7 or 8, or in other cases I've seen them, they put them in the methods chapter. So my suggestion is it should be on your first chapter, in your introductory chapter, and it should be around page 2. To tell you the truth, for an undergraduate dissertation, I'd expect to see it either at the bottom of page 1 or maybe beginning of page 2. I want to read a little bit about the context in the introduction and then hit me with the aims and objectives, so I know, as the reader and as the examiner, I know what it is that you are aiming to do. So let's think about the aim a little bit. Now, I've seen aims which are very short. Now, I said the title needs to be short, but the actual aim could be done in 2 to 3 sentences, depending on how eloquent you are, and you don't have enough time to write your proposal in most cases. So some of you had the research methods and you already have the aims. And again, this is my view of what a good aim would be. Take it with a pinch of salt. Different researchers have a different approach. But in my view, there is 3 elements that a good aim covers. The first element is the problem definition. Why should I do this research? Why is this research important? And if we take the example of the electronic meal experience, the sentence would say something about limited research and the power shift to the consumer when it comes to online commentary. That could be a very eloquent sentence that you could sort of put together, and you state, this is why it's important I do this research, in one sentence. Some of you might be able to add in that first sentence also, what is it about? It kind of betrays, once you start telling why it needs to be done, you could include in that one sentence what the topic is about. In this case, consumer behavior and online comments. But if you try to put it too much together, the sentences become long and you start losing focus. So rather keep them short sentences and have number one sentence, problem definition, the second sentence, what is this about, and the third part is how you're going to do it with the methods that you might be using. So those three, and I'll repeat them: problem definition, what is the topic about, how are you going to achieve it, how are you going to do it. Now, the aim is the big target of your undergraduate dissertation. In order to reach that target, we've got to take little steps. Now, for an undergraduate dissertation, I'd say the number of objectives, which are the little steps that you need, could be 4, could be 5. Definitely shouldn't be 3, because 3 aren't enough to show that you understand what it needs to be done to reach the aim. I'll explain. In my view, the first 2 objectives are about the literature. Okay. Now, the first objective tends to be, again, if I advise one of my students, I would say the big theory, the theoretical underpinning. So is it under consumer behavior? Is it under human resources? What is the big literature that you're investigating? And use for objectives, use verbs like research, study, examine, investigate, and basically, if you haven't come across Bloom's taxonomy, he's got like I think about 30 verbs you can use when you're writing your objectives. So don't start repeating yourself, because it just starts suggesting you're running out of time. You couldn't be bothered to think a little bit more about framing your objective. So going back to the first objective, the big theory. Okay, the second relevant to literature, again, for me, would be the context literature. So if I'm doing in hospitality, and let's say consumer behavior is my big theory, and then consumer behavior in hospitality in whatever the subject is, in this case, in online behavior. So that kind of suggests that you know what you'll be reading in terms of the objectives to reach your target. The third objective, and you could have a third and a fourth, so you could end up with 6 objectives, but at least one is about the research methods. And there, in the research method objective, you're going to say things about, I'm going to collect data, I'm going to analyze results, this sort of thing. So the fourth one is about the discussion and the critical evaluation of your aim. And then the fifth one is all about to conclude and to recommend, and there you'll say things about what you will recommend to academics and what you will recommend or the implications to practitioners, in my view, because I tend to do research in hospitality, and I like to say what the implications or recommendations to practitioners might be. So I gave you 5 objectives. I said 2 for the literature, 1 for the research methods, 1 for the critical evaluation, and 1 for conclusions and recommendations. You could make it 6, so you could add 2 for the research methods if you have mixed methods, which I totally advise against for undergraduate students. Master's level students and further is a different story, but for undergraduates, stick to one method. Own your methods, know it well, defend it well, because if you choose too many and you start, saying I'll triangulate, that suggests you don't really know what you're talking about at that level, and it might get you into more trouble than what you think might be. I'm trying to impress the reader, but Very difficult to happen at undergraduate level. So I suggest stick to one method, use it well, be certain about it. That's it, I think. Good luck, and I'll probably see you in the class.